Gentlemen, in what was another exciting week in the GSHL, could the W.O.A.T brothers keep the wagon wheels rolling? Could Peps bounce back from a tough Week 1 loss? And two teams that were heavily criticized by the media, could one of them face the music in a late Sunday rally to take home the W? All that and more on this week's edition of The Recap. I'm your host, Louis Infacino, coming to you live from our studios here in the capital of the hockey universe. Gentlemen, let's get right into it, starting with this week's game of the week between Peps and the Dutch Rudders. As it has been documented, Peps came up against the only other opponent that was better than him last week. Unfortunately for this week, it did repeat itself as the Dutch Rudders were absolutely dominant thanks to some strong performances by both Shesterkin and Panarin. The Dutch Rudders moving up to first in the power rankings and are now the only undefeated team in the Sunview division. Peps at 0-2, somehow, some way, still up to third in the power rankings. It's only a matter of time before we see a couple wins fall in line for this guy. Two really unfortunate matchups back-to-back to start his season, but I can only imagine what we'll see in the weeks coming. Dutch tying up the all-time series by a score of 5-5 with 4 wins in the last 5 matchups. Absolutely dominant by the Rudders themselves. Moving on to the Oxford Dandelions, who were by and far the best team of the week. They dominated the 4th place Pooh balances. Pals was 1-3 in lineup decisions, a tough one for him this week. Comer, who came into this week who started his history with Pals at 0-5-1, has now won 5 straight over the last 3 years. But some interesting developments coming out of this week and this matchup specifically, as the Dandelions have 3 active goaltenders on their roster. We've reached out to some representatives from their team for some comments. We have yet to hear back. We'll keep an eye on this story, as we know that's a league violation and something that we know the convener himself does not take lightly. Moving on, after a tough Week 1 loss to the W.O.A.T brothers, Ben Eager's Hands doing exactly what they do with a strong bounce back by taking down the number 1 ranked team after Week 1 of the power rankings, Hubie's Beauties. However, still a spot behind him in the power rankings, tying up the all-time series at 10-10. Ben Eager's Hands and Hubie's Beauties will face off in the last week of the season, which is not only a tiebreaker, but could have some heavy playoff implications. I know the fans will be following these two teams as they carry on for the remainder of the season. Moving on to what was considered the battle of the basement this week, two teams that were heavily criticized by the media, with the Toronto Maple Redges having some strong words for themselves, while Dirty F and the G's was spending 5 business days trying to figure out how to click on a link and figuring out exactly who I was. Folks, we've been friends for 15 years. An early and unfortunate, some missed starts to this one, leading to a fumble from both. However, it was Dirty F and the G's doing the unthinkable, coming back on Sunday with a very narrow margin of victory, taking this one by a final score of 6-4. Some saying the only thing thinner than this margin of victory is Two's horn itself. More to come on that. Moving on to what was a close battle between Dunk and the Auto Draft All-Stars. Surprising to see some bounces go in Dunk's direction on this one, as the Auto Draft All-Stars having a dominant week between the pipes. But unfortunately, that was not enough, and Dunk beats Bear for the second time in the last 5 years. Moving on to the reigning champion, Your Buds, who are keeping the momentum rolling. They absolutely steamroll the Wapoos Flash. They don't even participate in the goalie categories this week, but they didn't need them as they took down the Wapoos Flash with ease. Wilk losing his 3rd straight to Carter and falling for the 2nd week in a row. It'll be interesting to see how they bounce back. And moving on to the final matchup of the week, the W.O.A.T brothers unfortunately hit a few potholes on the QEW on their way back to Burlington. That caused a couple flats, and they got absolutely throttled, frankly, by arguably one of the strongest competitors heading into the early points of this season, Sauce Puck. The Butabi brothers, not a whole lot to say here. They were 0-3 in lineup decisions, and they were by far the worst team, finishing in the bottom half of each and every category this week. Again, we've reached out to some of the representatives of the team. There were some words that there was a closed door meeting by players alone. Safe to say the warning signs and the flares are probably going up for the Butabi brothers early on in the season. They will need a strong bounce back. Moving on, as we proceed with the power rankings after week 2, it is the Dutch Rudders moving up by 4 spots with their dominant victory over Peps. The Oxford Dandelions have a strong week themselves with some question marks between the pipes, They move up 7 spots to number 2. Peps, with 2 back-to-back tough losses, spends the rest of this week in the 3rd spot. Your Buds keeping the train rolling. They are in 4th. The Auto Draft All-Stars, after a tough loss, they still move into 5th place at 1-1. Hubie's Beauties, with a tough matchup against Ben Eager's Hands, they move down 5 spots to 6th place. Ben Eager's Hands moving up by 1 spot in front of Sauce Puck. They finish the 2nd week in 7th. Sauce Puck in 8th. Excuse me here, we're having some technical difficulties. Bear with me for a second. That's not it. Okay, and moving over to the 9th place, we have the Pooh Balances, who start the season 0-2. Toronto Maple Redges at 1-1. They finish this week in the 10th spot, moving up 2 places. Only 1 spot ahead of this week's competitor, Dirty F and the G's, at 1-1 themselves. Robert Thomas finished the week in 12th. The Wapoos Flash moved down another 2 spots to 13th. And it is the Butabi brothers who slid down the furthest, 8 spots, finishing the week at 14th. Gentlemen, that wraps up the recap for week 2 of the season. Good night, good luck, and suck it, brof. Take it easy, boys.